Okay, so now you've got into beekeeping. Things have gone well. You've got a lot of honey. So the question is, how do we get from a hive here with the honey to a bottled product to use? Okay, I'll kind of go over a few things that worked for me. Two things I'd like to say to start with. Number one, this is food for human consumption. Cleanliness important. Number two, this is not the only way it can be done. So, a few things I'd like to mention. When you go to the bee yard, I always like to take a smoker and just walk around through the bee yard. Spray some smoke around to where the bees can pick up that scent of that smoke, and that'll start them into kind of a feeding frenzy. Another thing that's kind of important, it's easier to harvest honey when there's a big nectar flow on. If you wait till later in the year, when the nectar is all dried up in the flowers, the bees tend to start to rob when you start pulling it. There's various ways of getting the bees out of the supers. My preferred method is using a fume board, which basically all a fume board is a frame the size of the hive. It doesn't fit down over it. It has a felt or some type of material in it with a metal cover. And if you got several hives, I'd recommend having 2 or 3 of these. Set them in the sun, let them heat up good. That makes the chemical evaporate quicker to drive the bees out. One of the best ones I've used is called Honey Bandit. There's several on the market. This one is called Honey Bee Gone. There's a Fisher's Bee Quick. All 3 of these smell really good. So there's one, I can't remember the name of one, but it smells horrible. It smells like all the dogs in the neighborhood's been in your garage, so you don't want to use that one. After your fume board is warmed up, I like to just spray like an X in it. Guess I need to open it up. And then just kind of go around the outer corners. It does smell really well. So, and when we put this back on, don't put it to where it will seal the hive completely. If you leave the corners open like that, as the bees fan that, trying to get rid of that scent, a lot of them can come out where you've left these openings come out here without having to go all the way down. And also it gives some air to intake, to push it out. There's one thing to remember here. If you're not using queen excluder and the queen has gone up in the honey supers and there's brood, it's almost impossible to drive the bees away. Those nurse bees just will not leave that brood, you know. So if you got that issue, some brood in there, you might want to set it aside and drive the bees out. Put the brood back in another super, set it on, or either pull your frames out and set in another empty super. But that's a very effective way. It will usually work on about 2 supers. If you got lots of them, about 2 at a time is about the only way it'll drive them down. Set those off on a card or something. They are very heavy. I use the mediums and they weigh about 65 pounds. You'll notice I'm wearing a yard apron. Reasoning for that heavy weight, we'll always end up putting that on our belly to help carry it, and this propolis will not come out of your clothing. One little tip here, if you pick these up by the side, you got a shorter distance here, it keeps the center of gravity closer to your body, and it's easier to do.
About how long do you need to leave the scent board on there?
It varies. Some bees will drive them out real quick, and some it won't. You know, it just varies. You just
Keep a watch on it.
just keep a watch on it, and it's also best down in the day to when the sun's out good and all the forage bees are gone from the hive. You know, it's not all crowded with bees. If you got out there real early morning on a cloudy day, they're all home. So if they're out foraging, or you're rid of the most of them, they've got room to go out. Well, you can. Some bees you can just shake off and have an empty super sitting there, just set the frames out in it. Another good way is, and only do this if you're using queen excluders. If you got a queen excluder on your hive, honey supers above it, where you know the queen cannot get up here and lay and be in there, you can flip those up on their end. Take an electric leaf blower. Don't use gasoline, because the exhaust will be in the airstream. And from the bottom, blow those bees out to the front of the hive, and they will always come back. But now, if you don't have a queen excluder, what'll happen, if that queen happens to be up there, you blow her out there and she gets in the grass, she's up in the material and laying a lot, and she's unable to fly, so you'll end up with a queenless hive. So don't go that route. And I would suggest, if you've got lots of honey supers, I would only pull off what I could do in one day, because the honey is real warm and it's much easier to extract. If you take it and set it in the basement, it'll cool down. Can also pick up some moisture out of the basement. So I would just take off what I could handle in one day. Another thing I'd like to mention too, I'm about to forget here, if you got a lot of uncapped honey in here, chances are the moisture is too high to extract. If it's above 18%, it'll start fermenting on you after you bottle it up, and there's no saving it. A good rule of thumb, if you may have some corners or something that are uncapped, if you can shake that like that and it doesn't come out, that's a good rule of thumb that it is dry enough. Also, the beekeepers have an instrument here to measure the moisture content. It's called a refractometer. So just bring in a small sample and it can be tested here for you. Might save 5-gallon bucket of honey of being fermented, because after that process starts with fermentation, there's no reversing it. Okay, this is called an uncapping tray. It's basically it's stuck together with honey, but anyway, it's a double tray with the top tray's got holes in it to drain the honey out. You will usually about 10% of your honey will be in the capping. So we uncap here and just leave the cappings in there and they'll drain down. Now, if you're coming in to rent this extractor and you need to get it back, you could take a couple of 5-gallon buckets, or just take one, some type of screen or something, and put your cappings at home and let it drain through, because it'll drain for several days. And if you're doing a lot of it, I've actually had to empty my tank out because it was filling up to here. You know, you do 30 or 40 hives or supers. But anyway, you get it in here and get it ready to uncap. Sits up here. What we have here, the Beekeepers Association have an electric uncapping knife. You plug it up, it's got a thermostat in it, and you basically just saw that off like filleting a fish, kindly. The cappings will drop in here. The electric knife belongs to Beekeepers. I actually prefer the cold knife, the serrated blade. This one, you notice, has got an offset handle. It's also got a bent tip on it, and it's worked fine for me down through the years. It's $25 or something, where the others is 100 and something, and if thermostat go bad, it heats too much, it doesn't heat enough. And also, if you're using an electric heating knife, have a place to lay this thing down. If it lays in the cappings, you'll caramelize some of the honey. Also, if it's laid on this tray, burn a hole through it. This is a Rubbermaid tray, it's about $150, so we don't want to do that. Low spots, the knife won't uncap down in there. There's a capping scratcher, you can scratch them out that way. Which, what I liked about this knife is that curved blade, you can reach in there and just cut it out and don't have to do that rapid. This is called a radial extractor that we have here. The top of your frames go to the outside. Reason being, your combs are pointed slightly downward. And if you put them to the outside, the centrifugal force as it spins will spin. It will spin and pull it out. I'm kind of having to work backwards here. But I'll go ahead and load that up, and you might want to film inside to show what it's actually doing. This one here will do six frames at a time, either a shallow or a medium. Another thing, there's going to be different weights in your frames depending on how thick the honey's built out, or if you have plastic foundation versus pure beeswax foundation. There'll be different weights in it. And it'll throw you off balance, like your washing machine, your clothing. You know, if clothing gets over to one side, it will throw it off balance, and you might have to rearrange your frames in there. Now, if you're using an extractor that's got the baskets in it instead of the reel, this basically is like spokes in a bicycle wheel. And but if you're using the baskets, you know, they're not going to be coming around like this. They're going to be laying in flatways in the baskets as they come around. So if you're using the baskets, you need the bottom to be the leading edge as it comes around to pull it out. But the radial, you always, the top bar to the outside, we're set up with our bottling bucket and our filters, and we always start out on a slow speed, about 30% of whatever the speed will be. And what that does is keep from slinging the frames apart, the wax out, but it also gets rid of some of that load. If you just start out at about 30% and just increase it as you get the load out of the combs. It may take quite a while to get some of it out, especially. We've not had much tulip poplar honey in the last few years, but it is a thicker, heavier honey. We actually had problems here a few years ago going through the strainers. It was just thick and heavy. It's a heavier weight also. But just start out, and you'll notice I wish we could have actually done loud, but being what it is, but that comes out against the walls and just runs down. Always leave your valve open on the extractor while you're extracting. If you close it up, that honey will build up to the reel that they can't turn. And we had this happen one time, so people weren't familiar with it, and this control box has got fuses in it, and it blows the load side fuse, and then the extractor just doesn't work. And there, you know, you're out there, got it rented in the home, and you don't know what to do, but just keep increasing your speed. And like I say, if it's out of balance on you, you might have to shut it off, pick them up and move them around in there. And it will actually balance out easier just, if you get to that situation, do 3 frames instead of 6. High speed, you're running about 350 RPM, so they'll get pretty dry. When it looks like it's pretty dry, I usually just shut it off about a couple of minutes. And that gives it a chance for any honey to just kind of drain down off the frame. Turn it back on for another minute or so, and it'll sling more out, and it'll get drier. And after goes through the strainers into the bucket, before bottling it, I like to let it set about 30, at least 36 hours, because 200 microns is pretty small, but you will still have minuscule amounts of wax, and it'll float to the top. It looks like foam. Skim that off, put it in a jar, and it'll just keep floating up, and you keep skimming it off and keep that honey. After extracting, I can show you a difference here. Personally, what I like to do is set my, we call it a wet honey super, because it's got some honey left, ain't the best you can do. I like to set them back on the hive for like 24 hours, and the bees will actually clean it up and repair it. I can show you the difference here in it. See, all these combs right here, I extracted honey from these last year. Those were put in, and you can see some uneven places a little deeper in them, but if you put them on the hive, they will repair them like in 24 hours. They'll clean them out, and right here's the difference between that and setting them out in the open for the bees to clean up. This was a dead out in a hive, and there's what it looks like when they rob it.
Wow.
Any way they can get the honey out, they'll do it. They're no concern about taking care of the combs.
Can you do a side by side of those two?
Sure. But anyway, I mean, you may have a better way of doing it than it's always worked well for me. When you're through with the extractor and the uncapping tray, make sure you unplug this thing. Wash it with warm water up to 120 degrees or so is fine. Don't use any soap. Don't use hot water, because what hot water will do, it will just melt the wax and cause it to stick to the material. But keep rinsing. If you got a hose you could hook on somewhere to where you can actually get warm water to rinse it out, let it go out, dry it out real good, and just be considerate of the next person's going to use it. If you accidentally, it's a bit hard to do with this, but on the tray, if you got some wax melted to the tray, you take that tray and just set it down in a freezer or something, just let it get cold, and that wax gets brittle, just take a plastic scraper and just scrape right off. That's the way I keep my hive tools. You know, you're always getting that propolis where they glue things together on your hive tools. I just lay it on paper towel in the freezer, and it just gets real brittle, and it just pops right off. So any questions?
About how long does the whole process take, usually?
Depending on
how much you got?
Yeah, if you got, you know, I'm slow, but I've done maybe like 30 or 40 supers in 2 to 3 days.
Okay.
But it probably, as far as doing one of those, from the time you got it setting in here to uncapping them, getting in there and finish up, a super should 15, 20 minutes or so, do that. And what would help a lot too, if you don't have, that maybe say just 1 or 2 hives, if you got a friend that's got 1 or 2 hives, if y'all just kind of get together, go in together and rent the extractor and just do them, you could do yours and bottle it, and then your friend or neighbor or whatever, they could do theirs and bottle it, and that way it would save you some money, it's just for 1 super of honey. This is and I mentioned plastic foundation or wax. This is a plastic based foundation in there that they build on. It's wax coated. When you get them, you can actually feel the sticky wax on them when they're warm. This one's just actually beeswax. You can see the wire reinforcement in it. For extracted honey in the honey supers, whether it be a medium or a shallow, if you're going to extract, you either need the plastic foundation or you need the beeswax foundation with reinforcement in it that just gives it some strength for spinning. But the most important thing on that is just keep that speed down and get the weight out of it as it goes around. And you get in a hurry sometimes, and I have uncapped one side, pop it in there, forget to do the other side, and you notice pretty quick that it's out of balance, so you look, well, missed one, so pull it back out. That happens, we all human.
You were talking about sitting the super after you extract the honey out of it back on top and letting them repair and clean it out. Do I leave it on there then, or do I leave it there for a day or two?
Okay, yeah, the question being, what are you gonna do for the winter, I guess, is
Yes.
the question. One thing I forgot to mention too, normally, you've got an inner cover on there that's underneath the cover that goes down over, it's got some holes on top of it. I normally set these supers on top of that and let them clean it out. If you just got 2 or 3 and you've got a deep freeze, what I would do is just set those honey supers in, put them in a garbage bag, set them in the freezer, leave them for 24 hours, because you're always gonna have wax moth eggs present in the hive. It's just like whole grain cereal, it's gonna be there. So that freezing component will kill them, and then you can just set them aside for the winter. Or if they're stored somewhere, if you got a good place where you can store them standing on their ends, but where there's light, the wax moths don't like light, they won't go in and bother them. There's also a chemical that we do on them, it's called paramoth. It's paradichlorobenzene. You can stack up about 6 or 8 honey supers, wrap them in plastic, take like a saucer or something that's you can set on the top of it, put about 2 or 3 teaspoons of that chemical in that tray, seal it up good, it vaporizes, and it's heavier than air, and it will go down through and kind of get a certain amount in that until the wax moths know they'll bother them. You go ahead and store those for the winter, and you don't have to worry about that. Come next spring, you take these honey supers that you had stored with that chemical, and they need to be aired out really good until you don't have that taste. Or the smell is like a menthol or something on there. And be sure and don't spill that down in on supers, because it will dissolve the wax. And do not put it on your bees. We had a couple here, they're no longer with the Beekeepers. I think everybody really tried to help them, and they'd go through the winter really well with their bees, and then that time, not long after they put their honey supers on, their bees were dying. And I said, you know, it just don't make any sense. So I got the question, he said, you know, I may not have left them out there to air out enough after I put the mothballs on them. I said, what? I said, you know, that's one thing we preach. Do not use mothballs on these things. It's specific for bees, and that's what they were using. They were using the mothballs, which is an entirely different chemical. Well, it was still
In there.
in the scent, or the chemical was still in that beeswax, because the beeswax is just basically a sponge, you know. And they was putting them on there, and these bees were dying.
Wow.
So, but it is, it's listed as paramoth on the beekeeping supplies. They've got the same chemical at Walmart. I think it's called moth ice crystals or something, but it's the same strength and everything, which we can't tell you to do that because there's nothing that says that is approved, even though it's the same chemical. But the main important thing is air those things out good before you put them back on, and that way you have no issue with it. Any more questions?
I think so.
Good.
You did a great job.
I'm finished.